Welcome to Inside the Set with Set Decor. Inside the Set is a series that focuses on the design and decor of stories that excite us and ignite our imaginations, where we get to discuss the collaborations between production designers and set decorators, and hear firsthand accounts of how those works of art came to be, from their inception to ideas on the page through completion, where we sit in the dark and experience them collectively.
Welcome to Inside the Set with Set Decor. I'm Halina Siwolop SDSA. I'm so pleased to welcome production designer David Ingram and set decorator Kevin Downey SDSA to discuss their creative collaboration and journey on the Netflix hit series Queen Charlotte, a Bridgerton Story. Kevin and David, thank you so much for joining me today. There's so much to discuss about this visually beautiful show, and I'm delighted that we can dive into your creative process. So let's just start with the basic question of how did you come to work on the project and what was the initial attraction? And David, do you want to go ahead and start?
Well, thanks for having us. So flattered and honored to be here. Very exciting. And that the show's, gained so much traction and there's so much appreciation for it. So it's really fabulous. So, but yeah, it was my first project to come to the UK on. And so I thought, well, what better show to come and explore stately homes and the history, of all the kings and queens of the UK. So it's the royalties. It was an absolute delight and honor to actually go through all the stately homes and palaces and recreate it on the stage. So, and since then I've decided to move to the UK.
Is that because you wanted to live in a castle?
In a castle, exactly, yeah.
And Kevin, what about you?
So I had done quite a lot of period dramas up to this point, actually quite a lot of Victorian dramas up to this point. And I got a call in whatever it was last year from Anna O'Malley, who's the producer of the show. We had worked together on a show called Penny Dreadful, which aired on Showtime. And I worked on all 3 seasons of that. And I worked on, I think, season 1. And that was my introduction to working on the show.
Great. Well, so speaking of period work, I know that there are 2 timelines that you guys had to work with, Georgian era England and the Regency era, and you guys went back and forth in the show. I'm sure you all did massive amounts of research, but I'd love to know how much historical detail did you weave into your designs? And conversely, how much freedom did you have to create your own design versions of those periods?
I also love period work, and I've been very lucky to work in a lot of period work in my career. So coming to work on a Shonda project, automatically you do have a little bit of liberty either way, And I suppose as a filmmaker, I think it's very important to make sure that the audience is engaged in the emotional journey of the characters. And I think that's probably a very important rule, and I think that's a very important rule to Shonda. We're not making a documentary, but so we are making something that that does involve the audience. I love delving into and exploring the architectural accuracy of the period you're in, and I do think that's very important. And so to find your own guidelines and your own boundaries within that remit, I think once you find your world, what's accurate and what's inaccurate. And then you pick and choose what you want to stay in or without. For me, I would thought it was quite important to stay architecturally accurate, but you're coming in on the back end of Bridgerton, so the colours are very important for the characters. So our background was, okay, we've got some established characters, they're their colours, let's wind them back through their colours and unwind their characters through color by unwinding the colors, which was really an interesting process to do. But for Queen Charlotte and King George, they were mainly not really explored in the Bridgerton series. So we actually, we could actually develop that ourselves. So we could give them the royal colors, the rich golds and the rich reds, and we could say, yes, these are their colors. But for me, the journey for George was very important because as he ails and through his mental illness, as he seasons and retreats to Kew Palace, his colours sort of dry up and go a bit warmer, and so they go to the brown. So we moved into Kew Palace and chose Belton House, where it was all walnuts and browns, and where it was more recluse and warmer, nurturing colours. So generally, the colours are important for character, not historical accuracy, but architecturally, historical accuracy is quite important.
And Kevin, I know that you said you've done a lot of period work. Was this your first time working with these two different eras?
No, actually, I decorated Mary Shelley, which also was streaming on Netflix. And we shot that in Ireland, Luxembourg, and France, probably maybe around 4 or 5 years ago. But of course, the character Mary Shelley was living in a very, very different London to Queen Charlotte and King George. So when I started doing that show, the Regency period, as you know, is quite reserved in a lot of ways. If it's a regular period drama, they don't have all the flounciness and the frills and all that we have in the Victorian period. The Victorian period is decoration on decoration. They couldn't stop decorating whatever they were doing. But as David rightly said, for Queen Charlotte and King George, we're in their very, very rich world of crimson, red, and gold. And the furniture that we were using for Buckingham Palace, or Buckingham House as it was known at the time, would have been there for a period before them. So we were trying to get that historical accuracy right, but at the same time trying to bring in the eccentricities, I suppose, of George in particular, because he was the character that he was, and trying to get all those right little nuances, like the models that he collected, that he had in his observatory, that he had in his bedroom, that he had in his anteroom. So I suppose we were trying to be as historically accurate as possible, but we didn't, there wasn't that restrained style of decoration that you would have on something like Mary Shelley, for example.
That leads me into another question. So, you probably did loads of research. Were there any other influences that directed you in the design process? Did you look at other films or art or literature? Was there anything that kind of spoke to you and said, oh my goodness, this is the way we should go?
I suppose one thing that I would say about working on this show in particular, and other shows as well, I'm a big believer in probably over decorating, if I was to be completely honest. So I would say some of the characters, and I had this conversation last night, we were talking about this at home, characters like Brimsley and Reynolds, for example, we saw their bedrooms and their quarters of the house, and all the little details, like, for example, I think it was Reynolds' bedroom off to one side by his bed. We were like, well, what kind of backstory could we give a character like that? Somebody who's maybe a little bit fastidious, a bit of a busybody, because they have to be, because they're footmen to the king and queen. So we gave him horology as a pastime, the maintenance and timing of clocks. So we gave all these little clock faces and clock innards and stuff like that. So I'm a big believer in putting that kind of detail on sets, because we never really know, directors and DOPs always say we'll never see that side of the room. But I think sometimes when you put in that level of detail, we did the same thing as well in Buckingham House in the kitchens, where we really dress every conceivable corner of it. And I remember Tom, our wonderful director, coming down and saying, we have to rethink how we're going to shoot this, because we want to shoot so much of the detail. So all of the detail and all the research that goes into, well, what in a royal house, what would be in the kitchens? And it's not what you'd have in a regular kitchen. It's all you have your bakers and your pastry chefs and your people who would just deal with butchery. And we really followed through with each one of those characters, even though we never see them. It's nighttime down there, and Dr. Monroe is making his poultices, and we just see in the background that the kitchen has been prepared for first light in the morning, where everything is brought out and meals are prepared. So I'd be big into the layers of dressing, and then of course all the research that goes into that and all the characters that we don't see.
And David, did you have any thoughts on those?
Yeah, so again, coming to the UK for the first time, you're actually going into these places, so you're so engaged with what you're recreating. Like when you're doing period dramas, usually you're having to investigate and look here, look there, and put it together. But you're actually going into these places. So you're going around photographing architectural references, molding details, sculpting areas, this and that, and you're putting it all together and all there in front of you. And then you have to say, well, then what are you going to use and what aren't you going to use? Because there's so much inspiration there. I found an interior designer, architect of King George III, Robert Adam, and his work is just so exquisite and so highly detailed that I could sort of use his work as a template for a through thread for a lot of the design for the film in terms of motifs and in terms of palette. So, and knowing that it's highly detailed and also period correct. So Yeah, so that I used that he was a strong one, and as well as basically going to all the locations, which is absolutely incredible.
So I suppose from a furniture point of view, keeping with the color palette of the rich crimson, reds, and golds, and I guess the dark colors and black, we chose Boule as the style of furniture in here. So we can see the little cabinet, the little writing cabinet at the door to the left-hand side. He has 2 Boule writing desks. And that tapestry to the left-hand side behind his desk, that's where we see him writing on the wall when we start to see him going mad and doing all these little astrological planetary drawings and so on and so forth on the wall.
Well, and Kevin, since you're pointing out some of these really specific pieces of set dressing, where were you able to source most of or some of your things? What was your process?
The bed was made by an external contractor. It's a steel frame. It weighs an absolute ton. And the headboard was sculpted and made 3D printing by us. All the drapery was done by us. The pelmet was done by us. His mattress is very, very comfy. There's a sunburst up on the canopy of the bed. So that was a big deal, getting all of that right. And then there are very good suppliers. There are very good suppliers in London for prop hire. Farley prop hire would probably be the most popular for this period style show. We bought the desks and some of the other furniture we bought. They were really good quality reproduction. And then we have some astrological models that you can see dotted around on some of his occasional tables that reference his interest in astrology and science.
Well, the details are really great and the colors are really lovely. And that brings up the point that there's such a lovely visual texture to your show, from the sets and the locations to the various fabrics you're using in the decoration. And it's just also very well orchestrated. And did you have to also, in this orchestration, did you work closely with a costume designer in making this all work together?
Yeah, we did, and we were obviously, hand in glove conversations with our amazing costume department. Sometimes when we wanted to pick a particular theme, obviously the Buckingham House sets are standing sets for the whole show. And I suppose the reality is we knew in advance what they were going to look like. The colors, the royal reds and golds and what have you. Costume department would have been aware from the get-go. But when we did the first Danbury ball, that color palette, we did these amazing trifold mirrored screens. And on the mirrored screens, we had some beautiful, there were floral painted images on them. And that was a sit-down conversation with our costume department. Remember that, David? And they told us what their, what color palette they were going with, and then we matched into that, because that was just a once-off event, and that was the first Danbury ball. So that was a very much getting our color palettes right, because it was just once in and once out. So that was very, very important.
And I'm sure there was a close collaboration with the director of photography. What kind of conversations did you guys have in the beginning on the look you wanted to achieve?
In it being a set design, we Jeff Dewar wanted a traditional softbox lighting over the top. And we knew they'd gone for that look in Bridgerton, but we wanted to give more shape to the walls. So with the softbox and the open roof, we developed a system with the head gaffer to put a ladder beam in down the sides of the softboxes, and then we could put directional light and shape the walls and give more character to the walls. So that was, I think, quite instrumental change in the work that I'd done traditionally in with sets when we have such a large open ceiling with a softbox, but we were able to cut the light and control the wall lighting much more. So that helped us enormously, which I was quite interested to see how that turned out, and that worked out quite well. I mean, we're working at such a phenomenal pace, as you know, with TV. So you do need to develop that shorthand. And same with Lynn Paolo for costumes. It's like, quick, send this over. Quick, that's our palette. Quick, does that work? We're looking at lighting for this direction. Does this work for you? Yes. Okay, we can go down that. He's shooting on set the whole time. Tom, the director, and Jeff, they shot every episode. So there was never time to prep the episode that they weren't shooting. So we would, had to really sort of get a good shorthand with them both, or with all of them. So, which was challenging and fun. So, yeah.
What about the use of, I kept thinking as I was watching it, you're lighting your rooms with candles, correct? Did you have a certain amount of candles you use? And I'm seeing chandeliers. Were those all just real chandeliers with bulbs?
Yeah, the hanging chandeliers were with bulbs, and anything on surfaces then was were candles, double wick candles, with the kind of a natural beeswax kind of wax to them. And yeah, they were placed, well, I was going to say sparingly, but probably not sparingly, directionally around the room where the action was. Yeah.
Well, it's really lovely, and it's such a nice, warm, soft light. It really looks sumptuous. So let's talk about some of the locations that you used through the show. How did you decide on the locations? I'm sure, David, those were early conversations. And when you went to these locations, how much did you have to enhance or transform what you were going to shoot?
Well, we knew we had to find a Buckingham Palace. So, and we knew we had our Bridgerton world of the time. So we had to really raise the architectural standard, and we couldn't get into Buckingham Palace. So what will give us that, their geography and similarity. So we ended up on Blenheim Palace, the most expensive location in all of the UK. So, not many people were happy about it, but we got our way in the end. And it really worked well because it just gives the entrance is just so grand. It gives us all our front of house, so to speak, large corridors and foyers and entrances, and a lot of the character in the series, which Shonda loves, is walk and talks and corridors. So although we built 3 corridors on the stage, we could use all the other corridors in Blenheim Palace. And the gardens were so beautiful. They were based on Versailles, so it was beautiful, beautiful gardens. So it just gave us so much latitude to move locations from the interiors to exteriors, and really give us that latitude of flowing from interiors to exteriors. And so we could back end blend them onto our stage work for our backer house, so to speak, set. So the intimacy scenes, like the bedrooms. So and we had them on the stage, and then the front of house locations then were on Blenheim Palace. So that's Blenheim Palace. That's the back of Blenheim Palace. And we had to do a final ball scene to celebrate King George III. And we had to shoot this in about, I think by the time we said, okay, we need to do a final ball, we had to shoot it within 3 weeks. So we had to come up with the concept, get it signed off, and then get it built. And, so poor Lynn Paolo with the costumes, I mean, we thought we had a challenge, but she had a challenge as well. So Tom and I said, let's take this scene outside, sick of interiors. And there's one thing about what I love about this series. I found this book, and it was just about follies. And so it was outdoor architecture of silliness and of architectural nothingness. So that sort of gave us a lot of, when we were in difficult problems, in situations where we couldn't get a location, or, for it was COVID, or we couldn't get to a location, we said, well, let's take that outside, or let's take it to a conservatory, or so with the ballroom. So we started enjoying this process, and it's like, well, let's do a ballroom outside. So let's deconstruct the ballroom. What's the most essential ingredients? It's the columns and the beamwork. So we deconstructed a ballroom, and then bring the chandeliers and the post and beamwork outside. Then we've got our beautiful backdrop of the Versailles Gardens and the Blenheim Palace. And there's just the fundamental architecture of Georgian architecture. And I wanted to celebrate Georgian architecture. So I used very strong Georgian architecture with the capitals and the beams, and to celebrate the strength of George III. And it was a very quick solution to get that built and installed and shoot it all within 3 weeks. That trellis work you see there as well was another interesting popular form of building material in the period. They loved their trellis. So, it was just lovely to make a little colonnade of trellises. And then we just put little flicker lights in there, like candles, to light inside them, and just to give some natural light. So that's the concept of it. Bad representation of the light there. But then yes, then the chandeliers. So we had to justify, we need to bring the light outside. Well, let's just bring the chandeliers outside. Let's do it. So a lot of fun and a lot of architectural accuracy, but in our own Shonda light. So
interesting story. I think David will get a good giggle out of this as well. One of the things, we went to the first recce here in the center of the dance floor there, well, outside, it was a gravelled area, and there was a sundial and we couldn't move it. And what do we do with the sundial? We were taught all kinds of different solutions. So we ended up doing quite a large, maybe 7 or 8 foot model make, maybe 12-foot model make of David. And we plonk him down, and he's holding an astrolabe over his head, which of course is one of the instruments that we use for looking at the sun and getting the correct position of the sun in the sky. So we made this huge model make, and it revolves. I'm not sure if you can tell when you're watching the show, but it does. As everyone is dancing, the whole thing is revolving. It's on a turntable.
And that also represents George's loves with his observatory. So the love of the stars and the obsession he has with Venus. So it all just ties in with his love of architecture and also of the conservatory. Yeah.
So going back into the palace, yes, of course. That was one of the things that we were restricted with pretty much in all of the big houses and palaces in England, that, you made your list, certain things you can't touch, some paintings can't come down, furniture can't be moved. The staterooms in Blenheim Palace, that was a stretch really between the dining room and up to the library. So your anterooms, one after the other. So we were able to use some of the furniture, quite a lot of the furniture they had in situ for those themes. But the first anteroom was a double height ceiling. It's got beautiful frescoes all over the walls, all over the ceiling, and that's where we staged the dining room in Buckingham House. And that was I thought that was such a beautiful set and some very poignant scenes. The honeymoon period when George and Charlotte should be having the most amazing time of their lives. She's sitting for breakfast, lunch and dinner all by herself. We see one scene where George comes, and of course it's an argument where he only wants to come for dinner and then leave again. But that room, I guess, we brought pretty much everything in. All we got was the empty room. So we brought in our own drapes and brought in our own huge, long Regency dining table, Chippendale chairs. And we see all the opulent dinner table dressing, like the stuffed peacock and the stuffed swan with all the pearls and jewels. That comes from the Tudor period, for royalty in the Tudor period. And it is stepped down over the various generations. So we thought it would be nice to include it for some of the dinner and breakfast scenes in the dining room. But I guess for that particular scene, we were, I wouldn't say allowed carte blanche, but we were allowed to bring in all our own furniture and dress it as the dining room, because as far as I know, the room is empty in reality. And that's the one at Blenheim Palace we're looking at, studio sets here.
The dining room scenes were really fantastic, and the food was so sumptuous, and there was so much of it.
Yeah.
That must have been a lot of work to get that all coordinated and for every meal scene.
Yeah, we set up kitchens in the basement of the house, and we have an absolutely wonderful food stylist, Debbie Lindsay. She did an amazing job with her team, and it is all historically accurate, all the food of the day. I won't go through it. I have the menus here with me, but I won't go through them. But yeah, all very, very, very accurate. Even the cakes and the selection of cakes were all Regency in style.
Just out of curiosity, what are some interesting food things that you had to recreate that we wouldn't eat nowadays?
Okay. On tonight's menu. Let me see, what have we got? Lamb cutlets with Duchess potato. We've pheasant with red wine sauce and new pot asparagus and carrots. We've seafood platters. We have quail eggs. We don't really eat quail eggs anymore. That would be for breakfast. Pedigree with hard-boiled eggs, fresh fruit salad. In the cake selection, Turkish delight, bonbons, poached pears, and there's a cake, would you believe, called the Venus nipple, which was a Regency style cake, and I guess it's a nod to Venus and astrology for our King George.
Oh, well done. What was something that really brought you joy? What were some of your favorite sets?
I think maybe some of the more simpler sets were more poignant for me. When we did Brimsley and Reynolds, their bedrooms, and their bathroom, and when they're having the bath together, I thought was very sweet. It was the last time that I saw them on set together, and we actually made them two little rubber duckies as little takeaway gifts with their names Brimsley and Reynolds on them. So they took them away as a little crew gift at the end. But I guess they're very, very poignant moments. David, I'd say you like the theatre scene, right? Was that one of your favorites, would you say?
Yes, no, I love the theatre. Yeah, but probably, yeah, I mean, I love that. I mean, my Tom, the director, was saying, David, we're going to do an opera. And I was like, well, what opera are we doing? So I rang my father back in Australia, who loves opera. And I said, Dad, what am I going to do? Dad, we need to make an opera, before 1760. Well, David, Henry Purcell, Dido's Lament. This is her mourning the death of her Georgian lover. So it was so lovely. So it's just, and Tom said, I love that. I love that idea. I love that idea. So that's how collaborative it was. It was so engaging, and did a beautiful stage set on that. But another set that I liked doing was the Westminster Abbey for the coronation of King George. And that was an interesting process because you're actually in the UK and it's like, well, let's go down to, Westminster Abbey. So let's shoot it right there. It's like, so, but of course the restrictions, the cost is phenomenal to close down Westminster Abbey. Getting the trucks into London is just ridiculous. And then all the modern detritus is a huge VFX cleanup. So, and then you can't control the lighting. And it just showed that actually it was better to build on the stage. So Tom, Jeff, and I came up with an idea of how to shoot it. Just let's do a 3-walled set. We storyboarded this through my concepts and said, I can give you this frame, I can give you this frame, and I can give you that frame. So we all agreed to it, and it's like, okay, let's do it. So we could do it for a really tight budget, and we could recreate Westminster Abbey accurately. We did it to scale at the actual altar. And then so went with Kevin. It's like, Kevin, how are we going to get this altar? How are we going to get these architectural bits? So Kevin, you can talk about this, how you source these architectural bits from your contacts in Romania or wherever it was.
Yeah, I found there's an architectural detail that you see at the back of an altar in a cathedral. It's called a reredos. I had to source one for Penny Dreadful. So the picture there on the left-hand side, some of these elements that we see here now, the beautiful carvings, they're from that. And they came from Poland, from a church that had been deconstructed. So we bought quite a lot of it from a salvage company, packaged the whole thing up and shipped it to London. And then we cast, I don't think we had enough we had to cast some additional pieces. And that's what a lot of the finer fretwork came from. That's where that came from.
Some of these pieces that you had to recreate, did you do a lot of 3D printing for that also?
We didn't. Because Kevin sourced those elements that we just cast molds, because we had those actual items, so we didn't need to.
And there we have the sovereign orb and scepter, which are used, and of course the imperial crown that are used in the ceremony, encrusted in sapphires and gold and diamonds and so on and so forth.
And the floor was like when I say 3-walled set, it's 2 walls and a floor. We did this beautiful top shot of the floor. So I spent a lot of time painting that floor. And as he walks up the stairs, there's a lovely top shot, and the floor play is quite heavily featured. Again, I didn't like the floor in Westminster Abbey, and it wasn't correct. This is more correct to the actual period. And although the altar wasn't correct to the period, I didn't really like their altar. I think there was like two palm trees in the illustration or reference we got.
It's really clever. I would never have known it was a 2-wall set with a really well done. And then the way they shot it, you feel the majesty of the place. You really do.
And the throne chair was something that we hired locally in London, and then we readapted, made some additional panels, and put on those beautiful legs on the bottom of it as well. So it just made it more royal, I guess.
And what they did, what they used to do compared to the coronation of King Charles that happened just last month. I mean, they spent a year decorating the abbey, putting the scaffolding and the fabric in, and they shut it down for a year, and you can see it's just incredible. That was a key frame reference.
Yeah.
So that was a key frame reference, and that carpet, that carpet, that's where I put that in, turned that into tiles and I just sort of used that. That was my sort of the reference to go, actually, the pattern's not bad, but let's make it into tiles and change the material and surface.
Well done. That was really a lovely, beautiful moment in the show. There was one set I wanted to ask you about at Kew Palace. It was George's observatory. What was the design inspiration behind that set?
So very early on, we were developing George's character. And again, this is how it was a very collaborative process with Shonda and Tom and Anna. And we were looking at what his passions were, architecturally correct. What did he enjoy and what did he commission? And one of them was he commissioned an observatory in Richmond. So we looked at that, went, okay, well, this is interesting. So, and then with conversation with Shonda, it's like, yes, let's do the observatory. That's his home, that's his character. So we went back to, again, Robert Adam, architecture of the time, and used him as a very strict guideline for that architecture. And I brought out a set designer from Berlin who'd worked with me before, and he studies and lectures Georgian architecture. And so I gave him this set to design, to draw, and he did such a beautiful job on that. And it just sings. It just really, really sings.
It's so different from a lot of your other sets. It's obviously a lot more masculine. And Kevin, where did you source out that telescope?
This was a model make by an amazing model making company in the UK. So there's a winch system there on the left-hand side, I think. So you can crank the thing and the whole thing revolves on a turntable. So we made the telescope, and then everything else really was were hires. I love the reflective brass lights, with the candles in them. And then he gets his desk with all these astrology books and reference books and so on and so forth, book rests. He gets his little bed, his little cot bed on one edge. And of course, we see him and Charlotte in here one evening as well. So it's very much his crash pad.
Yeah, and it's still very lavish, but it's a little more stripped down. You don't have the drapery and the fabrics.
Yeah, I suppose really all he was really interested in was science, agriculture, astrology. He wasn't really interested in the pomp and ceremony of the position that he, through his upbringing, that he landed himself into. So this was where he felt most comfortable.
Yeah, it's the honest, true self of his character, really, wasn't it? That's where he felt most at home. And by placing that at Kew, and we chose Belton House for his honest, reserved place as well. So we could set both these in that same location, and that set as well, that location, we dressed very honest and stripped down as well.
This one is a built, correct?
This is set, absolutely. This is set on the stage. That's right. But geographically, we connected them at Kew. They're both at Kew Palace, Kew House. But we used Kew House for Belton, which is north of London, in a place called Grantham. And we tied those two places together in terms of his character, because in Buckingham House, that's Queen Charlotte's all of Buckingham House, and his bedroom at Buckingham House, it's on show as well. It's on show to Queen Charlotte, the strength of this strong man, but it doesn't really show the fragility of this man. But Kew Palace and the observatory is the true insight of the fragility of the man.
Interesting as well, looking in this direction out towards the door going out into the portico outside. On the right hand side are some wooden crates, coir packaging where some of his instruments would have arrived into. His interest in botany and agriculture, so we gave him a specimen orange tree on the right hand side, and we gave him a couple of little bonsai trees on the left hand side as well, just to show that that side of his character.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, there's a little terrarium on the left-hand side. You can see it on the table. There's some little plants inside of there.
Well, yeah, because they called him Farmer George. So, and so that's his love, for gardening, and we created a whole garden patch for him as well, because he just loved being out on the farm.
Well, that garden patch was pretty amazing. And was that done at a location?
That was done at our Kew Palace location, which was Belton. So, and we wanted to give it some scale to show the obsessive nature of his character at that point in that decline of his journey, his character. And that's when Charlotte sees, when she follows him out and sees him in that madness, in that honest state of his true self, and just in this vast vegetable garden of this obsessed man. And, it's quite a strong moment. So we really wanted to make it quite powerful in the scale of that.
So what I know you built some stages, you were on location. Was it mostly location work or kind of what was the ratio of, because it's seamless, you can't tell. The average viewer is not going to know.
It was basically 2/3 a third. So a third on stage, and we could bounce back into, and our scheduling was, when we can't get into these stately homes, then we schedule around, we jump back into our stage work. And if we can't get into a stately home work, then do we build it on the stage, or do we, flip a set around and change the dressing out and try and get away with it with different lighting and different dressing. Corridors were a very important theme. It's lovely that actually every character had their place. And Brimsley and Charlotte relationship, with him following her a couple of footsteps behind, was the corridors. So the corridors in Blenheim we could use, and then the corridors on our stage. So that got us out of a lot of difficulty as well, having all these corridors.
Well, and speaking of corridors, I wanted to ask about the really lavish floral arrangements that you had. And every time I saw Queen Charlotte walk by them, I was like, oh, those are amazing. Real or fake? Tell me.
Real.
So your floral budget must have been out of the world then.
Oh my God, trying to control that budget, that was like a handful.
Yeah, I mean, look, they look fantastic. It is the royal palace. She is the queen. They do have spectacular gardens, so it is certainly one way of making the sets look very, very lavish. And it also shows the passage of time. When we change them around, time has passed. We have all the floral arrangements that we see for royal weddings, funerals, of course, as well, coronation, and table dressing for dining scenes as well.
Love that. And it got us out of trouble. Like in some locations that we had to shoot in, like Goldsmiths, which is downtown London, you got half a day to get in and half a day to get out. So how are you going to give these rooms a quick dress with a small amount of dressing? And flowers are high impact and easy to get in, easy to get out, low impact on labor in terms of within the set tech department. And we just use the contractor, and they have their own team to get in and out, and they've got that down pat. So, it did get us out of a lot of difficulty on challenging locations at times.
And of course, Lady Danbury's house exterior, that was a huge, massive greens number, to do ivy, flowers, shrubs, grass, you name it. And then we had to show it shortly after, when it was wintertime, when everything was dead. Isn't that right, David?
That's right. So that's how we separated current Bridgerton time and current Queen Charlotte time, or young Queen Charlotte time. So we had two time frames. And so our young Queen Charlotte time, we did it as summer and spring. And then when we flipped forward to current Bridgerton time, we went to winter to help the audience give separation, distinction between the two worlds. So floristry again and greens helped us a lot in changing those locations around, and we could lean on VFX on that as well. So that helped really give us distinction, passage of time.
Yeah, and that was a very dramatic change. You could really see that. And I kept thinking, did they shoot in winter and bring in all the plants, or is it VFX? So it made me wonder, but it was really well done. Well, was there anything else that you guys wanted us to know about your time on Queen Charlotte?
One thing that I think deserves mention, because I've obviously watched the show, I've been looking at Twitter remarks and stuff on Instagram and so on and so forth. I think in King George's bedroom in front of the fireplace, honeymoon period, when they need to have the bath in the bathtub, we were looking to, we looked in Vienna, Prague, Paris, for a bath deserving of a royal bath, for king and queen. So we found the bathtub that we used. We actually found it in the UK, but it was pretty sad looking when we found it. We had to restore the whole thing and use wood oils and varnishes, and then we had to do gold leafing. Do you know the bath I'm talking about? They're swans, carved swans.
That one was beautiful, and that's a wood tub.
It's wood. It's wooden.
But see, I couldn't tell that. Okay.
Yeah, so it's wooden. So we stained it and oiled it and restored all the swans. It's actually Tudor. It's Tudor in style. So I suppose we're kind of believing that it's something that's handed. It's a hand me down within Buckingham Palace. But I think it came out brilliant, and I remember showing it to Tom at the show and tell, and he was just blown away by it. He was so happy with this bathtub, and it's such a beautiful scene as well. It's pleated silk on the inside to hide any of the joins, and we obviously had to make it watertight. So there are glues and stuff in between the pieces of wood to make it watertight, and then it's a pleated silk that you can lie back against. I thought it was beautiful. And the little steps to get up into the bath, and the sheepskins on the floor. We have little tables there with candelabras. It's just such a lovely scene. And a point of interest here as well is that in the UK, and I think still in Ireland, because it was a British colony, all swans living are the property of the Queen. It's an ancient law.
That's so interesting.
Isn't that so interesting?
I would love to thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your creative processes. It was really a delight speaking to you. And not only is Queen Charlotte a well-written and fun show to watch, but the opulent production design and set decoration just keeps you wanting to see more. It's like eye candy. And so thank you so much for sharing your stories today and giving us some insight into the whole process. It's been a pleasure to speak with you both, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Halina.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Inside the Set with Set Decor. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and visit our website, setdecor.com.